Yes, next we are going to continue for the next session. The next session, the topic is about the impact of AI on financial investment that will delivered by Kelvin Tay. Kelvin is the Chief Investment Officer South Asia Pacific at UBS Global Wealth Management, where he also serves as a member of the UBS WM Asia Pacific Investment Committee. He provides strategic research and insight to the asset allocation process. And Kelvin is also a lead lecturer at the Wealth Management Institute, where he teaches the Advanced Diploma in Financial Management, the Asset Management Accelerator Program, and the Certified Private Banker courses, amongst others. Globally, Kelvin is one of our most sought-after speakers in UBS. He is also a bi-monthly guest host on CNBC Asia and a regular commentator on international broadcast media such as Bloomberg TV, Channel iNews Asia, and etc. He also contributes byline articles on a regular basis to the Business Times, Hong Kong Economic Times, The Age, and other publications. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Kelvin Tay.
Thank you for that nice introduction. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and very happy to be here. Nobody's not happy to be in Bali, full stop. So it's been great, but I've been spending the last 2 days holed up in my room trying to prepare this presentation because I was told I'm going to present to a room of very, very smart people. So that was kind of intimidating. And to be honest, I didn't expect so many. And then after that, when I came here and I listened to these two teenagers talk, I was like, oh my God. Thank goodness I did some preparation beforehand. Now, when I was 13 and 14 years old, I never won any medals, not at all. In fact, all my life, I have hardly ever won any medals. I was diagnosed as ADHD from a very young age. And in Singapore, in the 70s and 80s, ADHD simply didn't exist. And so you were basically classified as naughty, mischievous, get out of class, stay out of class, don't come in and disrupt my class. So that was me as a kid. Now, today, we're going to talk about artificial intelligence, and we're going to talk about how it will impact society, how it will affect the way we live, the way we work, the way we play. And since I'm from UBS, I have to talk about how do we make money out of it as well. And last but not least, because you're a room of very intelligent people, we will also have to focus on the not so savory aspects of artificial intelligence. AI on its own is fine, but AI when combined with other things presents some serious risk that we need to take care of. And it's not a coincidence that 2 days ago, the US, the EU, the UK, and China came together to sign an agreement to say that, yes, they recognize AI as a risk and that they will cooperate to try to mediate some of the risks that could actually come. Now, for the four of them to get together and sit down to agree on something, as you know, is almost impossible. So this is a serious risk that we're talking about. Okay, now, it doesn't move. Okay, cool. So, So basically, what is artificial intelligence? Artificial intelligence makes it possible for machines to learn from experience, adjust to new inputs, and basically perform human-like tasks. The goal of AI is to provide software that can actually reason on input and explain on output. Now, we've not seen this before, and now it's actually becoming even more part of reality. It's not moving. Here? Okay, yeah. So basically, as they've mentioned before, as our two teenagers have mentioned before, every job will be modified or replaced by these technologies over the next decade. Artificial intelligence will define growth and innovation in most industries over the next decade, and learning how to make use of artificial intelligence will be the main differentiator for corporates. Now, what do I mean by that? Now, I'm pretty sure all of you in this room would have had the experience of having some issues with your credit card, right? You dial a number, you get put on, and then they will ask you, do you speak English, Bahasa, or Chinese? You press another number, it puts you on again. Then they ask, is it for extending your credit card limit? Is it because there's a fraud? Is it because of this, because of that? By the time you actually get to speak to somebody, it's probably about 20, 25 minutes if you're lucky. If not, you'll be on hold for a very, very long period of time. Now, if you have an AI app out there, what's going to happen is that you can basically just ask the AI app a question. Can you please extend my credit limit because my wife went crazy shopping last week, right? And in a matter of like seconds, it will come back and says yes Or no, control your wife's spending. Simple as that, right? In a matter of seconds. So it basically reduces the time that we spend waiting to speak to somebody or waiting to get our answers back. Now, on top of that, it also reduces the number of people that's required in this process itself, right? So there is no one that you need to speak to at the end of the other line. So that basically means that you can actually replace the call center person that you call. And that means a lot of savings for the banks involved. So I'm pretty sure at some point in time, all this will actually come through. Now, all of us right here in this room, we would have actually experienced AI or limited form of AI in some way or another. Like, for example, when I text on WhatsApp, right, you get predictive text coming through, right? It tries to predict what you're going to type next, and then if you're happy with it, you just swipe and it goes through. That's a form of predictive text. But of course, that's a very, very limited form of AI. Now, AI is all over. It's been in the news every single day, right? This is back in Singapore in 2018, and even then, this is already completely out of date. In fact, if you go to any Hai Di Lao hotpot restaurant in Singapore, you'll see robots, right, serving you, right, bringing food to you, bringing drinks to you. You take it, you press another button, and it goes back into the kitchen itself. So it is a part of our lives. Now, the launch of AI this year was what actually really boosted the stock markets. In fact, if you look at these two charts here, you can see that the two lines came off very sharply. That was when, one of the banks in the US went under, Silicon Valley Bank, ironically. And then when ChatGPT-4 was introduced in March, the market went crazy. In fact, it went on a really strong rally. And you can see that there are two distinct lines here. The blue line is basically the S&P 500 with the IT and communication stocks inside. The other line is without the IT and communication stocks. And as you can see, it was largely the IT stocks that really pushed the S&P up a lot. Now, in the first half of this year, the S&P 500 was up 15%. But 12% of those returns were actually from just 7 stocks. Meta, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, and NVIDIA, right, as you can see from here. And if we were to extrapolate from the data from there, you can see that most of the returns basically came from just 2 stocks, Microsoft and NVIDIA. Because Microsoft was the one who was involved and related to ChatGPT-4, and NVIDIA is the one that provides the GPU chips for the application itself. So you can see that there was a lot of hype during that period. And of course, as we all know, a lot of people started to download ChatGPT-4. Now, if you look at NVIDIA's earnings, the earnings were tremendous. Last year, it was basically below 8 billion as a company. And today, we're talking about a company that's, generating a net income of about close to 23 to 24 billion US dollars. If you look at this line here, you hardly ever see any company with a kind of line up there, right? The second quarter of this year, NVIDIA is a bit strange. The financial year actually ends in January, not December. So the second quarter actually ends in July. And you can see that their quarter-on-quarter numbers, their year-on-year numbers was up about 854%. Because these guys are the only ones with the GPU chip right now. And therefore, if you want to do something related to an AI server or large learning model, etc., you have to get your chips from them. Now, AI is not something that's very new. In fact, AI actually started back in 1956. The term artificial intelligence was coined. Then in 1980, we had the boom of PCs in corporates, in the households, right? Now, that basically led to a lot of people downloading apps, being able to actually install applications to actually help them with their productivity. Then in 1993, we had the implementation of AI tech in PCs, right? That was largely with the military in the US. Then finally, in 1997, we had Deep Blue becoming the first machine to win a chess game against Garry Kasparov. Then in Watson, in 2020, Watson was able to actually answer questions properly and win first prize in Jeopardy, won $1 million in that sense. And then in 2021, AlphaGo wins a game of Go against Lee Sedoi. Now, this was what really made the world wake up, because if you understand this game of chess, or Chinese chess as we call it, or Wei Qi, it is extremely complicated, and the number of moves on that board is basically infinite. So for a computer to be able to beat a human in this one was really quite a significant achievement. And then finally, this year, we had the implementation of ChatGPT-4, and of course, we had 1 million users in 5 days, right? So that was the evolution. Now, what was the tipping point for generative AI, as you can see? Now, if you look at this number here, ChatGPT-3 in 2020 had about 314,000 users, but in ChatGPT-4, we had 21 million users in just a matter of a few days. So everyone is really excited about it. Why? Because it has now become interactive. You ask a question, you get the answer almost instantaneously. In April this year, when I had to go to Taiwan for a presentation, I just decided to try it out for fun. So I keyed into ChatGPT-4. Please prepare a presentation on the global stock markets in Chinese for me. So it took about 10 minutes, generated, and it came back out. And I couldn't understand a thing of it, because you know why? It was in traditional Chinese. I only read simplified Chinese. So I went back in and said, please generate a presentation in simplified Chinese for me regarding the global stock markets. Went back in, and this time within 5 minutes, it came up with a presentation. There was a whole full script in Chinese. It was amazing. So I took my time, I went through it, and I realized, wow, it was actually very, very accurate. And that was the very first time I used ChatGPT, and I was actually quite shocked. I was like, my goodness, I'm going to be redundant in a few years. The minute they mesh AI and a robot, that's it. I'm not going to be here in the next, Asia Pacific Mensa gathering. It will be a robot speaking to you from here. So, things are really advancing very, very quickly. And it's basically being underpinned by what we call Moore's Law, right? Moore's Law basically says that the number of transistors in an integrated circuit doubles about every 2 years. I remember when I first started using a PC, we were at 286. So that should tell you how old I am. 286, then 386, 486. Then with the Pentiums, right? Etc., etc., etc. Right? Now, today, we are basically here. So you can see that we are still doubling. And this is important because we need the power from a computing chip to be able to do the calculations with regards to the algorithms, to be able to generate the kind of answers in just a matter of seconds. If we had used the old computers of the past, right, the I-cores, etc., the answers would still come out, probably like about 4 hours later or something like that. I remember when I was in Imperial College doing building my quantitative models. I was doing some work there. In those days, you had to use an Excel spreadsheet. You would download data from data stream, clean up the data, feed it into Excel, and I was trying to do linear regression, right? So I'll press a number, and then I'll go for lunch. Then when I come back from lunch, if I'm lucky, the numbers will start generating, and then of course, the graph will start coming out very, very slowly. But today, even if I use my iPhone, I can actually generate the numbers pretty quickly. So that's how fast things have actually progressed, where the transistors are concerned. Now, why the sudden surge then in artificial intelligence? Now you look at this chart here. This one tells you quite something, right? So basically, you key in, tell me a joke about man, and then the answer comes. Why did the man put his money in the blender? Because he wanted to make liquid assets, right? Then what's even more interesting is when you say, tell me a joke about women, you get all this coming out here. Oh, it's actually, disrespectful, you must be considerate, etc., etc., etc. So generative artificial intelligence is actually sexist in that sense, right? Then after that, they give you the joke. Why did the girl bring a letter to the bar? Because she heard the drinks were on the house. That's how intelligent this guy is, right? And then on top of that, if you put in this picture and you ask him, what is funny about this image? Generative artificial intelligence can actually analyze this image and tell you why this picture is funny. Because it is actually a lightning conductor, right? A lightning connector, but it shows basically this. This is basically an old SCSI or VGA connector. So not only is it able to actually give you a joke, it is able to analyze the picture and tell you what is it all about and why it actually finds it funny. So basically, AI has actually gone through another level, and it's largely because it's now what we call generative artificial intelligence. Now, on top of that, how do users spend the time on various platforms per day? Look at this, right? Most of us would spend our time video, music streaming, or on social media. That's basically the majority of our time. Gaming is here, online shopping is here. So most of the information, most of the time is actually spent here. Now, this has implications because we are basically moving on. So from 2010 to 2015, we had basically the era of what we call platform-generated content. Then with the advent of Instagram, with TikTok, with Douyin, and etc., we had what we call the advent of user-generated content, right? Content generated by consumers, leveraging on the effect of peer-to-peer influence. Now, this is, in our view, coming to an end. From here onwards, we basically have what we call AI-generated content. Now, in December last year, just after Christmas, I was in Tokyo, and I went to Akihabara one Saturday evening. It was freezing cold. And I was going to this very famous restaurant, as you all know, right? Singaporeans with food, right? And I told my wife, hey, why don't you just queue up for me, and I'm just going to walk around. And I walked around Akibara, and I saw a crowd, right? A crowd, standing in front of this kiosk, this mobile kiosk. It was obviously a mobile kiosk because it was a truck with a screen. And I was wondering what they were watching. And I went nearer, and I actually found that they were actually watching an avatar performing. It was an avatar. And it was actually an artificial intelligence-generated avatar dancing and singing. And they were actually able to answer questions. So at one point, the entertainment stopped. The crowd was asking questions in Japanese. I didn't understand it. And the avatar was actually answering. And the crowd was cheering and clapping. I was stunned. I was like, what the hell is this all about? That's the first time I saw something like this. It was amazing. So this is what we mean by the era of AI-generated content. Now, as our two young speakers said before, AI will completely transform work. In fact, this is a data that I plucked from Accenture Research, and they basically said that about 40% of work will all be transformed in some way, right? So you can see that banking is right up here, has a lot of potential for transformation. So I'm really seriously going to be redundant, all right? So if you like me after this, please, when I send you my resume, please consider hiring me in some capacity. Natural resources obviously, has the least potential, and that's what I told. And seriously, this is not a joke. I told a bunch of graduates this year, don't be a banker, be a farmer. You'll never be out of work. And it's true, because you can't really transform that. Now, what is generative artificial intelligence? Because this is what's basically transforming AI. Now, generative AI is artificial intelligence capable of generating text, images, or other media using generative models. So what these models do is they learn the patterns and structure of the input training data and then generate new data that has similar characteristics. So generative AI in this whole chart, in this pie chart of artificial intelligence, is just a part of it, but it is the most important and most complex part of the AI pie here. Now, in order to do that, we have basically two foundations here. The first is what we call a foundation model. Now, what's a foundation model? A foundation model is a large learning model trained on a vast quantity of data at scale, and that's why we call it large, often by self-supervised learning or semi-supervised learning, such that it can adapt to a wide range of downstream tasks. So foundation models basically power the chatbots and other user-facing AI, such as text, image, or audio generation. So basically, you have all your data here, you put it into training, you plug it into this foundation model here, and then it actually comes out. Now, this is where it gets very, very fuzzy. And I'll talk about this towards the end of the presentation itself, why this is the most dangerous part of AI, because this can completely get out of control. Okay? Now, how are LLM models trained? A large language model is a deep learning algorithm that can perform a variety of natural language processing tasks. So there are basically 3 steps here, and as you can see, you basically teach an LLM like the way you teach a child, right? You give them basically inputs, and then you explain the inputs. You do what we call reinforcement learning, and finally, you can basically ask them to do something about it. Like, for example, write a story about dogs. And then the PPO model is initialized from the supervised policy, and finally, you get this reward that's coming out from here. So all this takes place in a matter of seconds. In fact, even within seconds. Right? Because again, the architecture today is so powerful and so quick. Now, there are 2 types of AIs. The first is basically rules-based, and the second is neural network. The easiest way for me to explain this is via what we call driverless cars, or autonomous cars. You can program an autonomous car by basically feeding in all sorts of inputs, right? Traffic lights, lamp posts, etc., etc. And these cars will move. And then when it hits a certain traffic light, it will slow down and it will stop if it sees red, where its sensors are concerned. Or you can do it the other way around. Don't go via the rules-based, you go via what we call neural networks. Now, what's neural networks? Neural networks is basically trying to replicate the human brain. Our human brains are made with neurons, right? And if you can have enough data feeding into a neural network itself, you can basically replicate it. So instead of saying if X then Y, you can basically train this to actually think to a certain extent. right? So now you don't need rules anymore, because if you don't have X, then Y cannot exist. Now you basically tell the human brain or the AI itself to think. Okay, so this is very data-centric. This is very data-centric, and you need a lot of processing power. This one, you need a lot of coders. You need a lot of subject experts to be able to actually tell you what data you should actually be keying it into, right? So in other words, data and computing power is essential to this part of the artificial intelligence framework. So you need a lot of data, and you need a lot of processing power. And where is the data going to come from? It's very simple. It's from this, right? We all use this every day. So basically, I use this. I'm addicted to this because, you know, with my phone, I control the watering of my plants at home, my curtains, my air conditioning, my robot vacuum cleaners. If I lose this, it's a complete disaster, right? And on top of that, when I die, this doesn't die. All the information that is in this here is still here. So basically, I can create a robot of myself, fit it with information from here, and that robot will be able to do the things that I do on a daily basis. Get it? So it's not so straightforward in that sense, but it's quite scary, so to speak. Now, if you look at who's who in the large learning model space, you will see that it's basically all the same names. You have Meta, NVIDIA, Microsoft, Google again, and OpenAI, right? So all these are the big boys. And the reason why you see all the big boys here is because it is extremely expensive and prohibitive right now to start a large learning model. Because the cost of the chip is very, very expensive. Now, what is the cost like? So over here, you have basically the cost of a traditional server versus an AI server. And most of the cost differential is here in the CPU and the GPU. For example, the cost in US dollar of a traditional server is about $9,179. For an AI-based server, it's 70,000. It is basically 7 times that. And most of the cost is actually in the GPU chip. It is basically 40,000 compared to about 1,850 for a CPU. So this is where the difference is. This is why NVIDIA is making so much money, right? Because they are the only guys who can actually do it right now. Okay? Now, but chip technology keeps evolving. So basically, we're now talking about quantum computing, right? And with quantum computing, if it comes in, obviously that's going to push the cost of computing down. And just 2 days ago, this came out in a journal in the South China Morning Post. Chinese scientists have actually created a chip that can perform AI tasks 3,000 times faster than NVIDIA's A100. And this chip is actually based on light. Why light? Because light is pure, right? If you can have light coming through, then you will not get any attenuation or latency in the signal. Then things can go a lot faster. So what I'm saying here is that the chip technology is going to keep evolving over and over again. And very soon, we're going to have technology that's going to be very, very cheap where this is concerned. So we don't really have to actually pay this kind of price. Now that in turn is going to affect the next part of the presentation, which is basically how to make money out of AI. Now, going forward, artificial intelligence, changing the way we live, work, and play. This is basically what we call the iPhone moment in AI. The time it took to reach 100 million users where the iPhone was concerned was 4 years. It took AI 2 months. The annual hardware size for the iPhone market was 205 billion in 2022. We think this is going to hit 130 billion in 2027. On top of that, if you look at the annual economic value, this will be about 1.1 trillion, whereas for AI, we believe it will be likely between 5 to 10 trillion. And last but not least, in terms of total returns since, this was about 50 times or 50x. Over here, we don't know. We simply don't know. What we do know is that AI will probably grow at a compounded annual growth rate of about 60% over the next 3 to 5 years, right? And I'll tell you why. Now, these are the top 10 fastest growing jobs. These are the top 10 fastest declining jobs. You hardly see any bank tellers anymore in some parts of the world, right? In many parts of the world where ATMs are all over the place, you don't see many bank tellers. In parts of the world where ATMs are not so widespread, you still see bank tellers. But in other words, this is going to disappear. Now, Credit Suisse went under in March this year. Do you know why? Because they lost 50 billion in deposits in 2 days. In the past, if you want to take your money out of the bank, what do? you need to go to either to the ATM to transfer money out, or you need to go to the bank itself and queue up, right? But today, if you want to transfer money out, you just have to be wherever you are, you have a Wi-Fi connection or broadband connection, take out your phone, you transfer it, and within seconds, all your money is out of the bank. That's why Credit Suisse went under, because they lost 50 billion in 2 days. If you had people queuing up, there is no way you can actually do that, okay? So basically, bank tellers and related clerks are pretty much extinct in our view. And obviously, if you're in the postal mail service as well, your days are numbered, okay? Now, AI would definitely increase productivity growth ahead in the examples I gave you. So these are examples of how productivity actually increased with the introduction of different types of technology. Now, the smartphone was a major, major development. Now, today, we use the smartphone like it's basically secondhand to us. But it wasn't always like that. When we had the first phone, or mobile phone as we call it, the Motorola, the big-ass Motorola, you know, the big one, right? Where you threw it at somebody, you probably kill somebody with it. In those days, the minute you can actually make a phone call without a wire, you'll be thrilled. You're like, oh my God, this is progress. But you can't even walk with that, because when you walk, it loses signal. So you had to stand still at any point, and basically make a call. Then we had the evolution of that. Then we could actually walk and call. And then we could actually drive faster speed and make a phone call. Then we had texting, right? And that texting only came in with 2G. We started texting, and it was like, oh my goodness, we don't even have to call anyone and hear their voices anymore. Then we had 3G. Then we had, wow, some parts of the internet coming onto our smartphones. And then finally, we have basically the smartphone as it is today. Now, I would tell you that what we have, where generative AI is concerned, is basically like the Motorola phone that we first had. The one where if I threw at you, you would have died, you would have been hit by it. So we're basically at the infancy stage of the generative AI development. So again, what we're seeing today is gonna be nothing compared to what's gonna come out in the future. Okay? Now, how is that gonna impact us? Let's take a step back in history. We had mechanization in the first industrial revolution. We had standardization in the second industrial revolution. We had digitization in the third industrial revolution. And finally, we had the fourth industrial revolution happening in 2017. And that's basically AI and robotics. Now, I did this slide in 2019, and I deliberately left it at 2019. Because in 2019, this was what we were already forecasting was going to happen in that sense. But the speed at which it actually came about caught us completely by surprise as well. Now, in the first industrial revolution, what did we have? We basically had the introduction of early automation via machinery, boosting intra-national connections through the building of bridges and railways, right? This, in turn, basically led to mechanization. Now, mechanization was extremely important because at a point in time, we had a doomsayer like Thomas Malthus basically predicting that mankind was doomed because we were growing at a geometric rate. The world's population was growing at a geometric rate, whereas farm production was growing at an arithmetic rate. So food production cannot keep up with population growth, and that parts of the population will die of starvation. But with mechanization, we were safe because that meant that crop use basically doubled and tripled. Right? So that was actually very important. Now, on top of that, we had basically the invention of the steam engine. With the invention of the steam engine, we could travel far. Right? So the British Empire was built on the invention of that because they could project the naval power very, very far. Then we had the second industrial revolution, which was equally important as well. We had basically what we call the concept of corporatization. Right? Mass production, division of labor, and the widespread use of electricity. So this, in turn, introduced other concepts like, for example, refrigeration, canning. So now I can store food. I get my crops in summer, I can store it in the refrigeration, I can can it, I can live for months or years after that. So that also actually helped. So again, this was a byproduct of the second industrial revolution. Then we had the third industrial revolution, where we basically had the rise of the digital age. This was when we had the first message sent over ARPANET, and that's basically our email. And that actually happened in the 1960s. And I would argue that, at a point in time, we didn't know what the hell it was. Because at a point in time, the world's computers was actually bigger than this room, right? But now, when we look at our computers, what do we see? We see a smartphone. So the advances have been tremendous in that sense. Now, then we come to the fourth industrial revolution. Okay? Now, in the fourth industrial revolution, this is basically powered by the mobile internet, automation, and artificial intelligence, right? So what's going to happen is that all the highly repetitive, low-skill, and even medium-skill labor will be fully automated, okay? And it will intensify the income inequality between high and low-skill workers. Now, this is key, because if you want to be able to participate in the AI revolution, you need to have the infrastructure. And it's basic infrastructure, fiber optic networks, because anything else below that cannot handle the kind of bandwidth demands that an AI network will need. If we can actually have all our answers to a bank answered via an app, why do we need call center operators? The Philippines will be at risk. India will be at risk, right? If we can have AI and robots meshed together, why do we need low-cost workers in Bangladesh, Cambodia, or in Vietnam? The robots will be doing all the work. They'll be assembling everything. We don't need that. Advanced manufacturing will become super advanced manufacturing, right? And who is basically having the lead here? Who has the advantage here? It's the developed countries, because they have the money, they have the infrastructure, they have the organizational capacity to actually be able to do that. So investments in education, in R&D is absolutely crucial for this part of the world if we want to be able to reach the kind of levels that the advanced countries have. Now, so which aspect of AI or which sector will be most advantageous to that? Now, in our view, it's basically healthcare. There are tremendous potential for healthcare to actually be able to actually benefit from this. And we think that AI will basically drive efficiency in healthcare, in the pharmaceutical industry, in medical devices, and in healthcare services. So if you implement AI, right, your costs will basically go down dramatically. Because right now, employee costs as a percentage of sales where healthcare services is concerned is at about 33%, right? So that will actually come off. Now, AI can be implemented in 3 segments: in drug development, in diagnostics and treatment, and in medical devices. How so? First of all, this is basically what we call an amino protein shape, right? So basically what AI can actually do is that they can actually come up with complex 3D shapes from a string of amino acids. Now, this has been something that has actually confounded scientists and biologists for a very long period of time. So now with AI, we can basically come up with this. And when we come up with this, we can basically do things like, for example, perform functions such as signaling and transcribing DNA. So in other words, AI is basically really quite incredible. The invention of generative AI is basically seen as important as the splitting of the atom or as the invention of the printing press back in the dark ages. So this is something that we think will be quite interesting. Now, on top of that, by 2027, nearly 15% of new applications would be automatically generated by AI without a human in the loop, and that's up from 0% today. By 2025, 30% of outbound marketing messages from large organizations will be synthetically generated. Okay? And by 2025, which is just 2 years, which is less than 2 years away, right? More than 30% of new drugs and materials could be systematically discovered using generative AI techniques. Now, AlphaFold 2 is an AI system developed by DeepMind that can predict 3D structures of proteins from amino acid sequences with atomic level accuracy. This is something that the human eye or the human brain can't do, right? So this is AlphaFold 1 and this is AlphaFold 2. And this is median-free modeling accuracy. You can see that it is almost at 100% right now, right? And in the next couple of years, it will be 100%, okay? Now, another example. This is basically the human heart. Traditional methods, doctors use traditional methods, only look at 7 attributes of the heart, and they achieve an accuracy of 56%. This one, 10,000 attributes of the heart and achieved 90% accuracy. Now, in Singapore, in one of the hospitals, they've actually started doing using this method with colonoscopy in one of the public hospitals. And the accuracy rate is 97%, compared to about 76% for me when I go to a private hospital, right? Because the doctors there have to look through, the stethoscope and see what's wrong. But with this here, it is basically AI that's actually looking through the stethoscope. Now, how do we invest in AI? The big, most important question, right? How do we make money out of this one? When we look at tech, right, we break it down into 5 different sectors. It's always easier when you break down, when you simplify things, right? So there are basically 5 sectors when we look at tech. There's the internet, hardware, software, semiconductors, and there's the IT services. Now, If you look at that in that way, the operating margins of the software companies are the highest, followed by semiconductor, internet, hardware, and then IT services. And the reason for that is clear. Because the barriers to entry for software and semiconductor is the highest. Right? You cannot just start a semiconductor company overnight. There's massive, massive barriers there. You cannot start another Microsoft overnight as well, because it's highly prohibitive. Then, if you look at the evolution of computing devices and the size of the annual addressable markets, this was the mainframes market back in the 1970s. Then microcomputers. When personal computers came and started to actually move into the households, you can see that the size started to get bigger. Then we have smart devices, because in most households you have one PC in those days for like 4 or 5 people to share. Today in one household, if you have like 7 people, you have 7 smartphones, right? So the market is actually getting bigger. And then now you basically have AI applications. Now AI is going to be bigger than this. Why? Because it is horizontal. In my phone, I have how many apps? I have an app for shopping. I have an app for banking. I have an app for health. I have an app for transport. Exactly. Thank you, sir. Not so intelligent here. Right? AI can be implemented in every single one of them. That's the reason why the market is going to be so big. Right? It's a horizontal application. It's not a vertical application. So the potential is tremendous. And I would argue that a lot of it will be in the software front. Because in the semiconductors front, you can't fight with them. You can only invest in them, right? So in the technology sector, the sector goes via cycles, right? As we all know. Okay, so the early cycle is semiconductors and hardware, followed by the internet, and then we have software, and finally, when the late cycle is here, we go into IT services. IT services are, for example, your software as a subscription service, right? SaaS. That is basically what we mean when we talk about IT services. Now, is the hype justified? Totally. I said before, right? It is basically horizontal. And you look at this, it took only 5 days for ChatGPT to reach 1 million users, right? Whereas Instagram was 2.5 million users, and Spotify was basically 5 months, right? It took Netflix 3.5 years. So you can imagine how fast it actually came through. Now, is there a bubble in the AI space? I don't think so. AI as a whole, I don't think there is a bubble. Certainly not. But NVIDIA as a stock, there might be a bubble. They are a completely different thing altogether. NVIDIA it's kind of like a bubble because of the fact that the valuations are through the roof. It is the only player in the market right now with the GPU chip. But I can assure you, there are basically another 25 to 30 people out there trying to actually replicate that, right? And as you know, technology evolves. 20 years ago, if I tell you Intel would be in trouble, would be nowhere in the top 5 where chip makers are concerned, you will probably say to me, rubbish, there's hell and nowhere that's going to happen. But look at where Intel is right now, right? So things evolve all the time. So in other words, AI is here, and they all go through this. It will basically come off, and then it will come back up again. But we do think that AI is here to stay for a very, very long period of time. Now, in the next few years, AI might actually lose a lot of its attraction and be very quiet. But it doesn't mean that it's dead. It is still ongoing, okay? The cryptocurrencies have completely collapsed, right? With the exception of Bitcoin. But does it mean that the technology is dead? No. Blockchain is still very, very much alive. A lot of the banks are using blockchain to actually reduce the operational costs, right? So the technology behind it is not going to be dead. The companies might be dead. So you have to actually separate the companies and the technology itself. Now, the App Store, for example, contributes more to Apple's sales right now than the handphone itself. Right? You can look at this here. The numbers are astounding. Now, Apple's numbers last night was poor. Right? The iPhone sales were not great. So tonight the share price is going to fall. In fact, after market close, the stock was actually down 3.5%. Generative AI startups with 1 billion plus valuations, you can see over here, OpenAI, Anthropic, Cohere, Hugging Face, Lightrix, Runway, Jasper, all these names. In fact, prior to this presentation, I'll be very honest with you, I have never heard of all these names before. And I was doing research, I was like, oh my God, what are these companies? Incredible, right? And you're not even talking about the Korean names, the Japanese names, the Chinese names. So you have a lot of companies coming up with this. Okay? Now, again, AI is a long-term opportunity. We reckon that the market will grow at 61% compounded annual growth rate over the next few years. driven by its simple user interface and accessibility. Anyone can use that. It's easy. As long as you know how to speak and you know how to type, you can use it. If you haven't tried it in this room, please try it. Because it's only through trying it, then you realize what I'm talking about. And it's nothing scary. It's very, very simple. Just download the app and have a go, right? You can use it afterwards when you're going back to your hotel if you're not staying here. It says, you know, how do I tell the driver in Bahasa to go back to Ubud? It comes out, and then you can basically show the guy. Okay, it's incredible. And where would the market be? So we basically broke down the market into two areas here. Infrastructure, applications, and models. So infrastructure is very simple, right? There's semiconductors and hardware. Under applications and models, there's the software assistance, infrastructure software, AI services, AI advertising, other applications and models, AI gaming, AI coding, development ops, and others. And all this combined here could perhaps actually feed another very, very big theme that's actually going on. And that's basically the metaverse. You can't have all these things happening without affecting development of the metaverse as well, right? And Meta is a very big part of that story. So this is where we think the growth is. And this is where we think it's actually easier, not easier, but a lot more straightforward to invest from this moment because of the fact that the hardware guys, the semiconductor guys, the share prices have actually gone up a lot. Okay. Now, we think that where your smart device revenues are concerned, it came out to 600 billion in like, you know, almost 9 years, 8 years, 9 years. Here, in AI, in just a matter of 5 years, we think it's going to hit about 300 billion. So if you do the calculations here, you know, this is really at the very, very early stage. And yet the growth is tremendous. Okay? Now, but it all boils down to one thing. When will your interest rates come off? At the end of the day, higher interest rates is going to stymie development of some of these companies. Now, if you look at this here, this is basically the unprofitable tech stocks, right? Which is the black line. And the, you know, this gray colored line, the light gray colored line is your 10-year real interest rate. And that's basically determined by the Federal Reserve. And you can see that the two lines are highly inversely correlated. Interest rates go up, unprofitable tech stocks come off. And by unprofitable tech, we basically mean a lot of the startups. Because if you invest in the 10-year US Treasury yield and it gives you 5%, and that's risk-free, the US government would definitely pay you 5% every year for 10 years. How much do you need to be incentivized? How much return do you need to be incentivized to invest in a startup where your money can go from $100 to zero, right? Where there is no guarantee, right? But of course, if you make it big, right? But how much is that potential return that you need to justify that investment? Okay, so that's why when interest rates go up, that rate of return that you need to get from your startup is actually going to be a lot higher. And as a result of that, a lot of the startups couldn't get funding, and they were dying in the last few years, right? Now, you can see that the revenue growth rate for the unprofitable stocks have actually come off a lot. This was from August 2018, before the interest rates went up, to August 2023. Now, in 2020, had a little bit of a pop, because during the COVID years, as we were all staying at home, we were using technology a lot, right? We were using Zoom. I never heard of Zoom until 2020, to be honest with you. We were using Zoom a lot, and now we use Microsoft Teams, etc., etc. But since then, some of the attraction has actually died until March this year when ChatGPT was introduced, right? So if you have a rise in bond yields, the conditions will tighten further. Now, if you buy a property in the US right now, you have to take a 30-year mortgage at about almost 8%. If you have to pay 8% for your mortgage, you think you have a lot of money left for other things? The answer is no. So there is a lot of competition for a limited pool of capital. And obviously, this is going to hurt, right? So this has to come off. And it will only come off if the Federal Reserve starts to cut interest rates. And I would argue that, okay, 2 days ago, they basically pivoted. I think that's more of a pirouette than a pivot. Because a pirouette means you turn and you come back to the same position. If you're a good belly dancer, if you don't fall down, right? So what's going to happen is that they'll stop hiking rates, but they will not cut rates immediately. They will take a longer period of time before they actually cut interest rates. So your 5.375% in the US right now will remain at 5.375% for quite some time. Okay. Now, obviously the bond yields are going to be very high, and the bond yields are a completely different matter altogether. It is because of the fact that the US Treasury is issuing a lot of bonds. So this is on a net issuance basis, this is on a gross issuance basis. This is the redemption. So this minus this, you get this, right? You can see that in the first 8 months of this year, they issued 475 billion. For the remaining 4 months, from September to December, the Treasury had to issue 567 billion. Why are they issuing so much? Because they have a massive deficit, 1.7 trillion deficit. That's 6.5 to 7.5% of GDP, of which 60% they can't cut. 60% is in military spending, social welfare, and Medicare. Those are the 3 sacred cows that they can't cut, right? So that's why they have to issue that. And on top of that, 2024 is elections year, and the US is very polarized right now. So if you cut spending, everything comes off, you're going to lose the elections. So it's going to be very hard for the US government to actually try to cut the spending. And that basically means that if they have to issue more, the yields will have to be higher to entice international investors to invest. Because as you can see here, the international investors have actually stopped buying in large quantities. It is in the investment funds that are actually buying it right now. Okay? So the dollar continues to be strong, and if the dollar is strong, it's going to be hard as well. Why? Because NVIDIA is a US company. So if your rupiah is stronger, it will be cheaper on a currency basis for you to buy the chips there, right? Simple as that. So the dollar will continue to be strong because the US yields continue to be a lot higher. Now this has actually come off to about 4.6%, so basically more or less the same as the UK gilts right now, right? But still, it's a lot higher than the Japanese government bonds or the German bunds. So as a result of that, this gap, as long as it doesn't narrow, means that the dollar is likely to remain between a range of 106 to 110 against the euro, at least for the foreseeable future. So in other words, for the AI stocks to pick up dramatically, interest rates need to come off. Or at least the 10-year government bond yields need to drop, right? The 10-year government bond has dropped from like 4.96% just last week to about 4.6% last night. It needs to come off a lot more, okay, to actually be able to, entice investors to fund all these developments there. Okay. Now, what about ASEAN? ASEAN has a huge market. The ASEAN new economy is likely to reach about 800 billion by 2025 because we're coming in from a low base, right? And on top of that, the new economy in ASEAN will likely see further free cash flow margin expansion. This is what we had in 2022, this is 2023, and in 2024 and 2025, especially, we're going to see this move very, very solidly. And there's good reason for that, because ASEAN has a very young population, with the exception of Singapore and Thailand, right? Indonesia has a very young population. Malaysia has a relatively young population as well. And of course, Indonesia is huge, 280 million people. So the 5 million people who are old in Singapore doesn't matter for ASEAN, right? This is where the promise is. And 3 out of 4 people in ASEAN lack access to basic financial services. So there is a lot of potential in here for financial services penetration into ASEAN. And of course, a lot of these companies right now are exploring AI. BCA, for example, is actually exploring the use of AI to reach this 3 people who don't have access to basic financial services. Now, Indonesia is home to one of the most lucrative fintech opportunities globally. This is Switzerland, and this is Indonesia, where the microloans market is concerned. You can see, way above everybody else. Okay, and on top of that, if you look at the annual technology investment by the top 10 banks in Indonesia, it has actually gone up by about 83% in the last 5 years. Okay? Digital transactions in a key Indonesian bank has actually gone up by 335% in 1 year. And again, you're coming in from a low base here, right? So there's still a lot of room for that to actually grow. So you're sitting in the heart of one of the most promising markets where technology and AI is concerned. Okay, we don't have to look very, very far. Now, health tech, as a percentage of tech spending, is very low. This healthcare as a percentage of global GDP is at about 11%, but tech spending for healthcare is only half of that. So there's room for this to actually catch up. ASEAN tech as a percentage of global tech spending is at 0.5%. ASEAN as a percentage of global GDP is at 3.6%. So again, there's room for this to move. Okay, now we come to the last part. Now, with AI, there's potential for good, for bad, and for very, very bad. In most technologies, like for example, internet, potential to do good is here. Potential to do bad is here, right? For AI, potential to do good is here, potential to do bad is here, and potential to do very bad is here. I'm not trying to scare you, it's true, okay? What do I mean by that? Internet, right? The internet that we all use in this room, fantastic. You cannot imagine life without the internet right now. But there is also the dark web, right? So that's the bad part of it. But that's small, right? That's small. But AI, because it's so user-friendly, because it's so easy, because it's horizontal, it will be in so many other different sectors and disciplines, has the potential to do fantastic damage. What do I mean by that? Now, of course, there are risks with regards to the tech companies, antitrust, advertising and data privacy, the gig economy, and obviously your geopolitics, right? AI in itself cannot do a lot of damage, but you can imagine AI in a robot, right? And what kind of damage can it do? If you look at what's happening in the Middle East right now, where you know, Israel and Hamas are fighting, a lot of it is conducted via drones, likewise in Russia and Ukraine. In the not so distant future, do you think it will be possible to send robots out to war and fight each other? It is totally possible, right? So a lot of those things can actually happen. Now, the other scary part of it is that the big will get bigger because the cost of investing in AI is extremely prohibitive, which is why in the LLM model that I showed you just now, it is all largely the global giants that are in that business, right? The Microsofts, the Googles, the Metas of this world. Because if you want to start up something and you want to go into AI itself, right, and you say, you know what, I want to be in software development, you have to buy the GPU chip. How many chips can you buy when it's like 70,000 US dollars? If the dollar depreciates to about 12,000 against the rupiah, you can buy a few more, but you get what I mean, right? The cost is tremendous. Then how are you going to compete with the likes of Microsoft for workers, for the coders, etc.? It's going to be very, very hard. Now, this is what a lot of people have actually said, right? So Stephen Hawking said the development of full artificial intelligence could spell the end of the human race. One thing that's clear from everything that has been written so far about the risk of AI is that no one has all the answers. The future of AI is not as grim as some people think or as rosy as others think. That means he has no clue what the hell is going on. Larry Page, AI would be the ultimate version of Google, ultimate search engine that would understand everything on the web. Elon Musk, I'm increasingly inclined to think that there should be some regulatory oversight, right? So, you know, these guys are actually quite worried, right? Elon Musk and Stephen Hawking. Now, mainstream media, we've always tried to portray AI, right? So our friends here showed very interestingly the Terminator just now, right? The very first time I was quite struck by AI was actually in 1987 by RoboCop, right? It's about this cop who died. Then he got resuscitated as a robot. But somewhere along the lines, his memory came back, and he became more human than robot, even though his whole body was a robot. It's one of the most significant movies of the 80s. If you grew up in the 80s, you know what I mean. And then we had, in 1984, a computer who actually developed feelings for a woman because they performed a duet over the internet. I don't know whether you saw this movie. It's called Electric Dreams. And there was a very famous song that came out of it, Together in Electric Dreams, right? So this was back in 1984, okay? Back in 1984. Then, of course, we have Attack of the Clones. Star Wars, back in 2002. So these movies are quite significant in their way, but I would say that the original RoboCop movie was quite thought-provoking. And in fact, if you want to be a little bit more philosophical about it, you can basically go back to this guy, René Descartes. Now, Descartes is a French philosopher, and he was acknowledged as the father of modern philosophy. A lot of European historians date the start of the Enlightenment to the publication of his book, of his philosophy, Discourse on Method, right? Where he basically came up with this very famous philosophy, ergo cogito ergo sum, or I think, therefore I am. And that's what makes a man different from a machine, right? And he also published another one in 1641 where he basically proved that God exists. So Descartes was quite different because he was a Protestant. He was living in the Huguenots part of France, and then he went to Netherlands, etc., right? But the key I'm trying to say here is that difference between man, machine, and a robot? There is. Now, as I've said before, if I do everything with my phone, okay, if I shop, buy things, I do transportation, everything with my phone, when I die, okay, this does not die. If my wife has my passport, my password, and she can download the data, and if someone out there can build a robot, they can download the data from here into the AI chip that's in the robot, and the robot can basically perform the functions that I performed. That is the very primitive part of basically the next generation. And it's not so far away, right? It's not that far away. The Japanese are very advanced in robot technology, right? And they've actually been experimenting with skin. How to make, the skin of a robot more and more like human skin. So it's not that far away in that sense. So if they can actually do that, and we can combine that with ChatGPT and all that, I can tell you, in 10 years' time, it won't be me here presenting to you. It will be a robot presenting to you, right? Because we can feed all the data into the AI itself, and then they can actually spill out all the dictums that they have. So it's basically rubbish in, rubbish out, right? If you put in bad data, it's going to come out rubbish, right? If you put in good data, it's going to come out fantastic, right? Now, the interesting point about this is, can robots think? Can they get to a scenario or to a future where they can start to think and not rely on the data? Now, the consensus is probably not, but again, we never know, right? Did you imagine that the phone that you used in 1985 would turn out to be like this? Never, right? Never, ever. That we can actually call a car, map our ways into something like this. Never. So, in other words, do not underestimate the potential for this, for AI, for the potential for damage to be done, because it's going to be very, very hard to control once it is actually unleashed. Okay, so with that, I've come to the end of the presentation, and I thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you.
Please give applause once again for Kelvin, ladies and gentlemen. No, in fact, please remain on stage because there will be a token of appreciation that will given by Pabudi.
Yeah, thank you, Kelvin. That was very insightful. I mean, do you know, this guy is actually one of the most sought after speakers in Asia in investment. He's a chief investment officer of UBS from Southeast Asia. And how lucky we are to get him here. And I don't know why you come here, but thank you for thank you very much, Kelvin. Really appreciate it. It was very insightful. And we have some small token of appreciation. And beside Kelvin, there's also one guy I want to call up as well so we can take picture. He's the one who arranged this. He's my friend from UBS, Singapore. By the way, they flew in from Singapore today just to speak to you guys and fly out tomorrow. Okay, so thank you, Cecil. Let's take picture together. Yeah. My boss.
Please give applause once again, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the amazing speakers.